Welcome everyone. Sam Leary here. Today we are talking about my 3-step UX writing process. This is for beginners, folks who are new to user experience in general, but UX writing specifically. So I say 3-step, you'll see that it's a little more complicated. Before I get into all of that, just for folks who don't know, my name is, again, Sam Leary. I make videos for folks that are interested in learning how to leverage the most valuable in-demand writing skill that is on the market right now to increase their personal, professional, and entrepreneurial opportunities, specifically for folks with a background in the humanities who might not feel like they're prepared to navigate professional or entrepreneurial spaces. As you may or may not know, if you've watched my other videos, I was a humanities major in undergrad. I earned my MFA from Johns Hopkins University, and I still didn't feel super prepared to make the transition to the professional world. So I'm trying to offer you a valuable skill that you can learn in, not too long, ideally. So again, that you can increase your personal and professional opportunities. If you have any questions, leave me a comment, follow me on the other channels, in terms of LinkedIn, Twitter, and let's get into it. So 3 steps. You'll see that it does become more complicated, but the 3 steps, as I'll describe them to onboard beginners to the UX writing process, are really, the traditional writing steps: pre-writing, writing, and revising, with a special emphasis on empathizing, defining, ideating, prototyping, launching, and testing. So let's get into it. Here's today's lesson plan. So I've included a quote. This is the quote I've built today's lesson around. For every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. So why did I choose this quote? I chose it because in my mind, it emphasizes why processes are so important, whether you are, a master of a craft or a beginner. Processes will save you time, energy, and money. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to dig into the specifics of my process, and we're also going to talk about different methodologies that I think are valuable for anybody who is interested in entering the field of UX writing or UX more generally. So just to run through these quickly, we're going to talk about why you need a process. I think that is context that we have to cover right away. We're going to talk about an overview of my process. Then we're going to talk about design thinking. And then we're going to get into some project management methodologies, specifically Waterfall versus Agile, how they compare. We're not going to get too into the weeds. Ideally, we'll see how I follow through on that. But I do think they're important to cover, even if it's just high level. And then we're going to close out with the traditional planning, writing, revising approach that I opened today's video with. So really what this looks like is, if we have to split it up into 2 parts, there's a complex project management approach and a traditional, more what I call a terminological approach. Whether or not that makes any sense to you right now, I'll clear it up as the video goes on. So if you're interested in UX writing at all and learning UX writing, I encourage you to visit my website, samleary.com, where you can download your free UX writing guide. Join my newsletter. Newsletter goes out once a week. It's full of UX writing tips and other business tips. So let's get into it. If this video is helpful, I invite you to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps me out. Leave me a comment with any questions that you might have. And again, get that ebook. It's about 20 pages right now, and I'll be adding to it as the course goes on. So my UX writing process, this is why you need a UX writing process. The image that I've included is the homepage from MailChimp's website. For those that may or may not know, MailChimp is an email software. It can be great, can be not so great. I've had good and bad experiences with it. It's kind of like the A player in the space, but the reason why I included it is because it is a I shouldn't say painfully. That is me self-reporting on my negative experiences with MailChimp. It's a simple landing page. It's not too complicated. Just looking at it, we have that, the hero section is divided into effectively 2 parts. The top is all white with a clear button, a call to action, not too much text. And the bottom is segmented into 4 parts. convert with automation, optimize with AI and analytics, target with segmentation, and sync with integrations. So what do we have here? It looks simple, but really what's being offered to the user, to the person who lands on MailChimp's homepage, is you're basically getting every option that MailChimp is trying to offer its users. So what that really looks like is, again, automations, AI with analytics, target with segmentation, and sync with integration, which says nothing about their call to action, which comes after the turn emails into revenue H1 tag. So everything is very clearly defined, and the idea that the page is simple is really just an illusion. A lot of thinking, a lot of testing, a lot of dollars have no doubt gone into making this page. And we're gonna dig into why by talking about the process. By the end of today's video, you'll gain a better understanding of how much time, energy, and resources goes into producing digital products like this. So consistent user experience, improved product usability, and more business success. Those are the three reasons that I've outlined why you need a UX writing process. So to establish a consistent tone on the subject of consistent user experience, to establish a consistent tone and voice across all user touchpoints is incredibly important. I'll talk about what tone and voice are in a second, but ensuring users receive clear and concise messaging throughout the journey is essential. If you're not doing that, the experience is going to feel off. The probability that the user is going to break from the experience is increased, and what that translates to is dollars lost, revenue lost, which is obviously not so good for business. But let's talk about voice. Think about voice as a brand's unique personality and identity, and then think about tone as the emotional inflection that's applied to a specific piece of messaging. So voice is all encompassing. Tone has, it ebbs and it flows depending on the specific context. If you have questions, I know tone and voice can get a little confusing. In the future, I will offer examples where I'm sitting down and writing through, actually writing through my UX process. Right now, we're just covering it at a high level so you can get the terms and start researching on your own. But let's talk about improved product usability. So incorporating user feedback into the writing process to create user-friendly interfaces. I cannot emphasize enough how valuable user feedback is. Leveraging research to make design decisions, to make writing decisions, is something that you need to do, because effectively what it means is, your decisions are data-driven. It's not, you can have intuition. Intuition is an incredibly valuable tool, but if you can't back it up and support your intuition with data, in my experience, the probability that it all comes crashing down and falls apart is increasingly high. You need to have those data-driven decisions to communicate with stakeholders, team members, etc. So guiding users through the product flow and reducing friction points. That is, when you apply research, that's inevitably the goal. You want to make the user flow, the product flow, as easy as possible, as frictionless as possible. And the best way to do that is to leverage data. If you don't have access to data, that's why I created the UX writing questionnaire, which you can fill out once you download my free UX writing ebook that's available on my website. So more business success, obviously this is a generality, but building brand credibility by creating professional and polished products. This MailChimp, the homepage, the hero section, it qualifies the brand. It may be simple, yes, but the design is clean, it's consistent, it offers value to the user, and in that way, it builds credibility. It's also going to contribute, when we talk about more business success, a UX writing process is going to contribute to a higher user satisfaction and loyalty, which leads to increased revenue and growth opportunities. If you have a process in place, you're ensuring that you are checking the necessary boxes as you go, which you'll see in a second when I talk about the design thinking process, as well as Waterfall and Agile methodologies. So it's ultimately about revenue growth, and just generally speaking, growth opportunities. The best way to do that is to have a methodology and to pass through phases. I prefer an iterative process. That's really the best way I've found out how to do it. But let's dig in now. So the overview of my UX writing process. Like I said, I've tried to simplify it and offer more traditional terminology to help beginners basically conceptualize how you can work toward a more complicated, detailed methodology. This is something that I use as a small business owner on a regular basis, a daily basis. I'll say though that while I think about it as pre-writing, writing, and revising, the way in which I communicate the process with clients, it's much different, and that's intentional because these phases are great for somebody who's interested in learning UX writing and applying the process, but it's not so great for a client who wants a clean and polished digital product, or who wants their voice, the words on their website or application in their experience to be refined. So let's work through it right now, and it'll get complicated as we move forward. So pre-writing is about empathizing with your users and then defining solutions to your users' problems. I'll dig into how exactly this is done, but this has a lot to do with research, user personas. Again, I said research, but collecting data, actually bringing numbers to the table that you can use. Sometimes it's as easy as distributing a survey to a mailing list of your businesses or organization's most engaged followers. Sometimes it requires, different software tools. Other times it's a matter of, if you're a solopreneur, if you're a personal brand and don't have access to that audience, it's a lot of, hypotheticals, empathy kind of being the driving force to help you imagine your target market. I'll also suggest using databases. There are a lot of free public databases that you can use, that you can leverage. If you have questions, I can recommend different databases. We have to keep moving. So leave me a comment if you're interested. Otherwise, let's talk about writing. So ideating content outlines to solve user problems, and then prototyping for feedback from stakeholders. So I should have mentioned at the beginning of this slide that this overview, this high-level overview, is informed in large part, really primarily, by the design thinking process, which is about empathizing, defining, ideating, prototyping, and testing solutions. At the same time, it's not such a complicated, it's deceptively complicated, but really the way that I kind of think about these different methodologies is it's like, of the three that you can see on the page, design thinking, Waterfall, Agile. Generally speaking, I would say design thinking is the easier of the three to immediately understand and implement, which isn't to say that it's the easiest of, that it's easy by any stretch of the imagination. Just when compared to the others, it's easier. So that's why I'm taking this approach. Ideating content outlines to solve user problems, and prototyping for feedback from stakeholders. So again, once you've empathized with your user, typically I'll define a number of different solutions depending on what I'm working in. Maybe it's the user journey is an application where, we want a user to sign up for a monthly subscription after they've downloaded a free app. It's a matter of empathizing with the user, figuring out what they need, defining their solutions, so the steps in the user journey, iterating accordingly, be it words, verbally or visually, depending on the job that I'm doing. Again, I'm a small business owner, so the scope of the projects that I work on differ in large part from the scope that somebody who is a dedicated UX writer to a specific organization or business is likely going to experience. But, I prototype drafts for feedback from stakeholders. And what that means is, I might have, for a given user journey, maybe we prototype, 5 to 7 different paths, 5 to 7 different opportunities for users to reach the the end goal. And I'll, we workshop them, my team and I, and then we present them to stakeholders. That's like, again, a very high level of, what actually is going on behind the scenes, but bare bones, those are the essentials. And after you seek feedback from stakeholders, usually that helps guide the decision-making process. Then it comes time to apply the feedback that you get from stakeholders to actually launch, and then post-launch, ensuring that you're collecting data to continue to improve the product. If we revisit MailChimp, I can't remember the name of the site. Maybe users will know. I think it's called Way Back or Way Back. I've used it in the past, but I'm drawing a blank on the domain. You can go back in time and basically see different versions of websites as they've evolved over time. When we talk about how those evolutions take place and why they happen, it's entirely because of the solutions being tested, the design solutions, the microcopy solutions being tested and evolving. Okay, so you'll notice now that, and I think we talk about it more in the upcoming slides, but I'll quickly cover it. This is, we have on the left side the Waterfall methodology, and on the right side the Agile methodology. Importantly, the distinction I'll make right now in communicating the differences is this. Typically, both of these are used for software development. I say that because they don't exactly align with what a workflow might look like for a UX writer, but I do think they're incredibly important because they, software development is no joke, and the processes that are in place, that have been put in place at what I like to call the A players in the industry. I'm talking the Apples, the Amazons, the Microsofts, etc. The processes that those businesses and organizations utilize to develop digital products are tried and true. They work. So this is the more complicated approach, but it's the approach that, again, the A players use. So if you can, kind of wrap your head around the more basic, let's call it, pre-writing, writing, revising, and then understand how that can be layered with the design thinking process, I think you can then begin to understand methodologies like Agile and Waterfall. So I recommend that you go out and do your own research and practice. That's why I created the UX writing questionnaire and the voice chart, so that you can begin practicing these methodologies on your own using free tools. So again, that's on samleary.com, my free UX writing guide. So sign up, get yours, and let's keep moving. So let's dig in a little more to the design thinking process, because typically I have found that, if you are interested in doing freelancer work in the beginning to gain experience as a UX writer, if you're volunteering, typically the sorts of clients, at least in my experience, that you're going to be working with do not have necessarily the bandwidth or the resources to follow along. I shouldn't say follow along, that sounds inconsiderate, but to the Agile methodology and the Waterfall methodology are very difficult for beginners to communicate to stakeholders on projects. That's why I typically recommend, in terms of project management, if you're going out on your own and just trying to gain experience, begin with the design thinking process, because of the three that I've outlined, it's the easiest to wrap your head around and to segment accordingly in order to communicate with project stakeholders. So again, just to kind of reiterate where we were on the last page, understanding users' needs, developing user personas and empathy maps, that's empathizing with your user. I'll talk about user personas in a future video. We have a lot of material to cover in this course, but that's really what goes into empathy. There's research and user personas and empathy maps. Defining solutions, identifying the problems that need to be solved, and then developing clear problem statements, and really, again, defining solutions to the user problem. How, what is it, what if the goal is to get a user to add a piece of clothing to their shopping cart, what are the steps that need to take place regardless of where they land in the user journey? I'm talking about, if it's a website now, to guide the user to that end result, and what are the different design decisions, the different writing decisions that we need to make to communicate to the user where in the experience they are, and again, move them to that, that end result that we want in a way that is as frictionless as possible. Ideating solutions, this is about brainstorming. This is about iterating your basic ideas. So you'll notice over here, sharing ideas. All ideas are worthy. You want to take a diverse approach. You want to diverge and converge is what the model says. And what that effectively means is if you're working with a team, everybody kind of goes their own separate ways for a little bit, and everybody does some thinking on their own based on the previous two steps. And when you converge, you come back together, share solutions, so that ideally you're arriving at the best one. And just prioritize the time that this requires. This process is not the kind of thing that happens in a week. It's weeks. It takes time to pass through each of these. If I'm working on a small project, I'm dedicating at bare minimum 1 to 2 weeks. I mean, 1 week would be the expedited process for, to empathize with the ideal user persona, to define, these different problems. And I'll read through all of these in a second, because I do really like this graphic, which is from the Agile Elephant. What is design thinking? So prototyping, create low fidelity prototypes. If you don't know what low fidelity prototypes are, again, this is going to be something I talk about in a future video, but learn about wireframing. What is wireframing? That's a great way, really, if you're interested in, UX design, for example. That's a great way to onboard yourself, is learn about wireframing. And I would recommend a free tool like Canva or Figma, just to name two examples that I really like. Canva definitely being the easier of the two, and then just practice making wireframes. Go to your favorite websites and wireframe accordingly. Begin to understand the parts of a website, of an application, as they exist independent of the actual branding. If you have questions about that, leave me a comment, because it is a little more complicated. So testing with end users and gathering feedback. In an earlier slide, I emphasized the importance of accessing a brand or organization's most loyal and engaged users. So depending on what that is, for a nonprofit, it might be volunteers. It might be, longest active members or most active members. For businesses, it's likely returning customers. If it's a subscription-based model, it's people who have been subscribed for the longest amount of time, or people who have made the most touch points with the businesses. But segmenting different ways to identify who the most engaged users are, so that you're opening the door for feedback on prototypes as they're emerging. Now, it requires a certain amount of trust, but it is an important process so that the feedback you're getting on the project and the product isn't just limited to stakeholders and people who actually have skin in the game in terms of building the product. That can lead to many problems. It sounds great, but not so good in practice. Testing, analyzing feedback, refining and prototyping, iterating and refining until not just the solution is achieved, but understanding what it means for what the implications are for a process to be iterative. It means that the end result there isn't an end result. It means that there's kind of always this fluid movement forward and an evolution that's taking place, and always trying to arrive at the best decision verbally and visually based on data. So that's how you end up with, what I would imagine is MailChimp's extremely high converting home screen. But let's run through this. Empathize. And this graphic, which I mentioned, this is actually, it's in an article from the Agile Elephant, but it's Stanford's D-School design thinking process. So this is a legit resource, stanford.edu. So I recommend, if you got to screenshot this, whatever, if you can just save it to memory instantly, that's pretty cool. I recommend doing both of those things. So empathize, interviews, shadowing, seeking to understand, and being non-judgmental. Defining your personas, role objectives, decisions, challenges, pain points. Ideating is about sharing ideas. I kind of covered this already, but understanding that all ideas are worthy, diverging and converging from the group. And you want to just prioritize all user, you want to prioritize an understanding of everybody's thinking processes so that you can take the best elements from all of them, from what everybody brings to the table, and arrive at a better solution. It's rare that my team and I, or the stakeholders that I work with at different businesses and organizations, that people go their separate ways and we come back together and it's like, Joe did it. It's done. Joe got it right. And we know really what the process looks like is taking bits and pieces and applying them, synthesizing them to create a prototype. So prototypes, mock-ups, storyboards, trying to keep things simple at every turn. Storyboards, a lot of times, depending on what the budget is, where you're at, what the process actually looks like. A storyboard, can be as simple as sticky notes on a whiteboard, and just that could work. It depends on what makes the most sense for the specific circumstances that you're in. That's again why you need a process. Failing fast, again, one of the benefits of a process is if something isn't working, but this is kind of how we segment the workflow, the probability that you're going to minimize the amount of wasted time due to failed solutions or inadequate solutions, you're really minimizing the amount of wasted time. And to that end, a process functions as a form of risk management. Iterating quickly also. Once you kind of get a methodology down, you're familiar with the design thinking process, you can just move through it. And that isn't to say that it's easy to move through necessarily, but you start to be able to conceptualize what are the steps that I need to meet, right? Like it's like anything else. Anytime you can set something to memory after a significant amount of reps, you become faster, you become better, more efficient, etc. Testing, understanding the impediments. So, collecting data on the other side of launch and basically using key performance indicators or KPIs to make decisions about where's the most friction in the experience and how can we undercut that friction. So, and really that tells you, the data will tell you what works and what doesn't. And, it says role playing here, which I think is kind of funny, but, there's what that really means in my mind and what it looks like in practice is, stakeholders in a room having conversations about again, role playing, somebody's the user and, we're trying to gain an understanding of what all of these, how the different design decisions, different visual and verbal decisions are contributing to the data that we've collected, and just trying to step back and understand what position the user is likely in. Again, iterating quickly, same as before, I kind of covered it already. So project management, waterfall versus agile. I'm just going to cover these quickly because quite frankly, we could, there are entire classes, entire courses developed to one or the other, waterfall versus agile. If you go on some educational website like edX is known for agile project management courses. So we're going to talk about these very quickly and then move on. So again, software development is where these tend to be used the most, but they can be really helpful for UX designers, for UX writers, and just teams in general that are, working with anything that depends in large part on user experience. So even if you're thinking, I don't want to be a software developer, it's still valuable because this still informs the decision-making process. And at a larger organization with a larger team, developers are in communication with designers and researchers and writers. So it all goes hand in hand. And I think it's essential to understand that. So waterfall is a linear methodology, a linear process. Agile is an iterative methodology / process. So understanding that, and then understand the visuals. So I like the visual on the bottom because you can see that it's iterative, but there's kind of this sub iteration that happens. And what that basically means is if we look here, understanding the requirements, then design, then develop, then test, we deploy. Okay, let's say what happens when we deploy. Maybe it's, I've worked on projects where it's time to deploy. The deploy happens. Something goes terribly wrong. We need to bounce back. We need to go backwards and, circle back to where we were. So I just think that this is the graphic that I included here, I think is valuable because it communicates that, the process is iterative, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to complete the entire process in a single iteration. Waterfall, conversely, is linear, so you're passing through each of these steps: requirements, design, develop, test, deploy, maintenance, and that's a process. So they're very similar. Waterfall, again, requirements, design, develop, test, deploy, maintenance. I would look up, if I were you, case studies that use the waterfall methodology, case studies that use the agile methodology, because there is ample documentation for both that's going to come along with those case studies, and it can be really valuable in just helping you conceptualize what the process looks like before having done it yourself. Agile, on the other hand, we have requirements, we have design, develop, test, deploy, review, launch. So again, very similar, but differences that are important. So now we're talking about my process. And again, this is like very simplified. This is, my process is something that takes weeks, if not months, depending on the scope of the project. So planning the UX writing process, defining the goal, and conducting research. So we're empathizing with the user, yes, but the idea is the way in which we're empathizing with the user is to, figure out how we can align business objectives with user objectives. I've included this Venn diagram on the right, The Beginner's Guide to UX Writing and Why It Matters by Career Foundry, which is a really helpful article. Obviously, it's not going to make you an expert in one read through, but it can be really helpful in just, again, getting you in tune to the process. One of the problems that I've encountered since leaving the world of academia, since graduating university, finishing my schooling, is that it's really hard to learn when you don't have a standardized curriculum. And I think Career Foundry can be a valuable resource in offering you information that is uniquely qualified. Again, that's really the project of this video series, but I think in terms of written resources, Career Foundry is a great place to go. I'm not affiliated with them. It was just helpful for me. But let's see, what does this say? Words. Yes, words are important. They're important for designers, researchers, and business goals. And it's, this Venn diagram communicates the way in which words are they're not just for the user. They're not just for designers. They're not just for the business. They're for all parties involved in an experience, whether it's the creation or the usage of it. So really important. And for that reason, we need to have processes in place to make decisions about the words. So understanding user needs and business objectives, and then determining the scope of the project. What kind of product are we building? Are we just trying to refine a single user journey in an application with many different user journeys that's selling many different products? Or are we, is it larger scope? Is it like a full redesign of a website? Is it a full application build that we're working on? Understanding the scope is important because it varies. Then conducting research, again, analyzing user feedback and behavior, reviewing the competitive landscape and best practices. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of doing industry research. That's not necessarily going to give you numbers, although you can obviously get numbers. Industry research is important because when we talk about failing quickly, leveraging a specific process in order to fail faster and learn faster and thereby arrive at the best solution possible faster, reviewing different decisions that have been made in the industry you're working in. It's going to be incredibly valuable. And it doesn't matter what the scope is. It could be very small. We could be talking about a small business that is working on a website and they only have, 4 employees on staff, and they effectively have like one developer who is also a designer, who's also a content writer. At the same time, it could be, a large organization that has 100 employees and a full team of, designers, developers, etc. So understanding the competitive landscape is going to give you access to obviously other decisions that have been made in your industry, but it's going to allow you to work beyond the scope, the scale of your specific project and your team. And that's so important, especially for teams with lower budgets. So now writing, my UX writing process, I selected this. This is from Ferrari's website, their home screen. This is actually a video, which is why it appears kind of pixelated, but I like this UX writing example a lot because it just, again, we're enforcing brand identity. This is a cool video of like, this car flying effectively around turns, and start your engine. It's moving. I'm not sure if you can see it, but we have this little circle right here that's loading. The red bar is progressing around the circle, and when it reaches the end, it switches to the next video. So there are different signals, different icons, different elements on this page that are communicating to the user where they are in the experience and what's happening. Start your engine. Okay, right away I know whatever this experience looks like, I'm at the beginning of it, if it wasn't already obvious that I'm at the home screen, because you don't necessarily know how somebody ended up on your site. You can't anticipate how they're going to arrive there. So ensuring that, there are different signals to cue them in to where they are and where they're going and how they can get there. So we have these bubbles that, the home screen is sliding through. We can click right to discover the Ferrari lineup, or we can scroll down. So we're getting different directions. And I think this is really important, especially for Ferrari. And this is why I suggested why I chose this example, because it is an international company. It's not just for English speakers, importantly. I want to say that the URL was like, immediately as soon as I typed it in, it was like ferrari.com/en-US. So decisions have been made to make the language and the design as accessible as possible to the widest audience possible. And the way that happens is during the writing process, refining solutions using rough and rapid prototyping and iterating and improving until the solution is user-friendly and effective. This has a lot to do with different, ways of testing, relying on different methodological approaches to the design process, which I've kind of already outlined. But again, knowing your audience, is it an international audience that is likely to speak many different languages? Is it a local audience? Age, demographics, psychographics, thinking through everything that you possibly can when you're trying to refine solutions so that you can put words in the experience, choose different design elements that make sense for the users who are likely to end up there. Then creating the actual content, developing a content strategy and messaging framework. We'll talk about messaging frameworks in a future video. If you have questions about them, let me know, and I'm happy to get back to you. Crafting copy that meets user needs and business goals. Again, start your engine, like the voice of that, the tone of that. I just think it's so good, and it is working to immerse the user in the experience and get them to the next phase. So I've included on the right the table of contents from my free UX writing guide. Again, visit samleary.com. I invite you to download it. It's like 20 pages right now, but I'm working on building it out. I'm happy to get some feedback from people to learn how I can make it better. Lastly is revising. I chose this image. Obviously, it's not a literal example. It's from an article I really like, How to Build an In-House UX Team, Usability Geek. So building an in-house UX team, depending on where you work, who you are, this is going to look very different for different folks. So for some, you have to be the entire UX team. If you're starting out and the route you're going is freelancing and volunteering to gain experience, which as I've mentioned in other videos, generally speaking, if you can help it, avoid biting off more than you can chew when you're volunteering. Be very careful and defensive of your time because things can get exploitative. I'll leave it at that. If you have questions, comments. But how to build an in-house UX team. If it's just you have to wear a lot of hats. If you have a small team, and maybe this assumes basically that you don't already have a UX team. But if you do have a small team, I'm imagining a nonprofit with 5 to 10 employees, let's say. You have a small team. Who can do what? Who knows what information? And how can we leverage different folks' knowledge to effectively build a better digital product, especially during the revision phase? We talked previously about diverging and converging. So when we converge, if you're a small team, who knows what, and how can we measure, or ensure that we're going to be arriving at the best possible outcome? So there's self-editing and then there's peer reviewing. So there's that diverging and then converging. So self-editing, really important. Simplify language, shorten sentences for clarity, and remove unnecessary words and reduce redundancies whenever possible. You want to make sure before other people see it, are you giving it your stamp of approval? That's so important. I know it probably sounds obvious, basic, what have you, but just keep in the back of your mind, self-editing. It's not just the first time something is edited should not be when stakeholders are reviewing it. And for people who might be more familiar with UX writing and just generally speaking, US best practices, that's probably obvious, but for beginners, it might not be. Peer review, asking stakeholders for feedback and suggestions, considering different perspectives, and incorporating constructive criticism. So once you've self-edited, hand over those resources, distribute those resources, and then prepare for different perspectives, prepare for constructive criticism, and prepare to adjust the design accordingly. That's the revising process. And in my mind, I'm not sure if I've mentioned it throughout this specific video, but I know that I've mentioned it in previous videos. Even this simplified writing process, this planning, writing, revising, is iterative. You have to understand that you cannot expect to just, have a great piece of writing at the end of this 3-step process. There's no denying that, you can definitely make something good or great, but the idea that it is going to be your ideal solution is naive, and you're setting yourself up to be disappointed. The idea is that you repeat this process. You revise, you go back to the drawing board after you've done your revisions, or at least, organized notes for, the product that you're making. And then you begin the planning process again. And then you begin the writing process again. And then you begin the revision process again. So there are phases that are being passed through. That's everything that I have for today. I want to thank you so much for watching. If you found today's video helpful, I hope you'll subscribe to my channel, follow me on Twitter, follow me on LinkedIn, connect with me, and download my free ebook at samleary.com. So that's the free UX writing guide. I got a questionnaire in there and a UX writing voice chart to help you start learning UX writing faster. So thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions, leave me a comment and I will respond quickly. I want to thank you so much for watching. I hope that you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you next time.